Welcome back to the channel, and for those of you that are new, welcome for the first time. Thanks for giving us a shot. This is a customer's 2003 or 2004 X5 with the 3.0 liter M54 engine. This video will apply to a lot of vehicles in this year range. For most of the procedure, obviously there'll be some differences in assembly and disassembly, but this can give you a good idea of the design nature and the job's nature, so you can have an idea of what you need to have to get this job done. So this customer brought this vehicle in, didn't even have a complaint about the brakes, and he was actually pushing through the primary circuit in the master cylinder into the secondary circuit. And that's designed so that when you push the pedal down, normally you're using the primary circuit, and when the first circuit fails, the primary, then as you push the pedal down further, you'll get into the secondary circuit. He didn't even realize that his primary circuit seal was blown. Brought it in for some rear suspension work, which we're almost done with. There'll be some other videos to come on that, and a couple other things we're doing on this vehicle for him. So jumping right in here, we want to share the tools and stuff that we're using. We used to use this suction device here. We got this from Harbor Freight. I think it's not a Harbor Freight, but it's Holt fluid extractor, and we used to use this to bleed the brakes. Hook up a bleeder tool that it comes with, and hook it up, and pull suction on there, pump the pedal, and open and close the bleeder screw as you would traditionally bleed the brakes. You pump up the pedal, you have the helper hold down on the pedal, then as the pedal is held down, you crack open that bleeder. You allow the fluid to come out. The helper yells out when the pedal hits the floor, and then you would close that bleeder before the helper lets off the pedal, so it doesn't draw back in any air or fluid with bubbles in it. And so that way you're only pumping fluid through the system one way, and you just make sure that your reservoir is topped up to prevent you from running it dry, right? But instead, this time we got us a pressure bleeder. So we're upgrading the channel, with the newer tools and better things to try out, so we can provide some reviews for you guys on some of this stuff as well. We haven't used that one yet, but we will update in the description about it. This is the one that we bought. Okay, here is the master cylinder that we purchased. Here's the part number for that. All right, you can take a little screenshot of that. And then here's some torque specifications. So the master cylinder to the booster is 26 Newton meters. And then the bleeders, 7 millimeter in size, are 3.5 to 5 Newton meters. If you did want to go crazy torquing that, usually good and tight is good enough on those. Don't overdo it. And then the brake lines, some people torque them, some people don't. From what I gathered in the specifications, about 40 Newton meters, depending on the size. I get the specifications from Mitchell DIY. You can get one vehicle at a time there, so you don't have to pay for a subscription. And the information is usually pretty good and easy to find. So if you want to take a look in there, go ahead and get a subscription going on there. It's like $20 for the vehicle, but you can get everything, wire diagrams, all that. So here's the new master cylinder. Here is the reservoir, the cap, and the strainer. All right, it takes like 3 screwdrivers and a little ingenuity. All right, clean everything that you're going to use around this open cap. Keep it clean. Another good thing to do is to before you even bring the vehicle in to start working on it, wash down the area all around the master cylinder up there, because there's usually a lot of dust, and then that will help you to prevent contamination from going into the hydraulic system. Remember, that fluid is going to be in there moving back and forth just a little bit for a very long time, and if there's dirt suspended in it, it's going to wear the seals out in the system, and it's going to cause diminished performance. All right, like I said earlier, we have some other things going on. We're waiting on one bushing to come in to finish up the rear suspension. But anyway, here's what we got set up for bleeding it. We're going to start here on the right rear when we get the master cylinder installed. And so we'll be able to just crack this open. And you can see we got that taped to the line wrench. Let me show you guys that. This is what a line wrench looks like. Okay, this is an 11 millimeter. This will prevent you from stripping out your brake bleeders. And sometimes they're really tight. So you may have to, apply a little heat or work them in the tightening direction first, and then work them loose. If you have rust and stuff like that, maybe spray a little penetrant around it, and just get them to come loose before you attempt this job. Make sure you can get all 4 of them loose. Up on jack stands safely, obviously, that's something you want to do. And then so we're going to start with the furthest away brake caliper with the bleeding, and then we're going to move to the other side in the rear, and then we're going to go to the front, and then the one closest to the master cylinder. All right, so we're going to start here, then we're going to jump across to the other side in the rear, then we're going to go there, and then we'll go to the driver's side front, okay? Or the left front, because some people in the UK, they drive on this side right here. Okay, another thing that I want to share with you guys is a good thing to have is a scan tool when you're going to do this job. Reason being, you want to be able to bleed this guy right down here, the ABS. You want to be able to activate that and allow the fluid to be pulled through this, so that way you're ensuring that you're evacuating not only all of the fluid, but all of the air you may have introduced into the system when you did this job, okay? And you want to make sure that your brake pedal is holding nice and firm when you're done, right? So that's the way to do it. Now, talking about how I removed this thing, what I did was I pulled this seal up, obviously. I pulled that seal up, okay? They say you can just disconnect the negative battery terminal in the trunk, and you disconnect the negative battery terminal off the body, okay? And that eliminates all the grounds. So this could touch anything it wants, and there wouldn't be any type of arcing. That's your positive battery cable that comes up here for the jump start terminal, okay? It connects to this one right here. So all I did was take the nut off, and then I removed this plastic piece behind it that clips into the wall in a specific position right here, okay? And then I was able to just push that straight through. I put the nut back on it so I don't lose it, and just pushed it straight through. The other thing I did was I took the horn off, just one 10 millimeter. I didn't even disconnect the wiring. Just took it off that bracket. And I took that nut off down there, and then there's another a 10 millimeter bolt down here. And that just gave me a little bit more flexibility over here. Also, the nut for the wire clip that holds your positive wire as it comes here. It just gave me a little bit more flexibility with this wall. Not much, but it was worth it because it just made it real easy when it was time to actually pull the master cylinder up and out of here. You may not even have to do any of that. You might be able to just get it right out. But I didn't want to have any trouble because I heard some horror stories about this rod down inside here. I'll try to show it to you guys. Falling out of place, and that clip you see way back in there. As you can see, mine is nice and in place, and I kind of cleaned up that bore right there a little bit, cleaned up around, okay, because you don't want to lose your torque on your bolts. This master cylinder that I got, it came with new nuts, so I will not be reusing the old hardware. And the reason is, these are what you call Stouffer nuts, or all metal lock nuts. You can see they kind of have like a tapered design on the top, okay? These are supposed to be one-time use. If you absolutely don't have any, I would recommend cleaning the hardware with a little brake clean or something. Try not to get any inside the booster or any contaminants inside the booster or in the lines. If you don't clean up real good around here, you should cap those lines so that way you're not introducing contaminants, like I said, okay? But worst case, just clean it up and then use a little bit of blue Loctite, and then these will hold, okay? I personally recommend replacing them, and also I personally recommend getting a brand new reservoir because the reservoir is really difficult to pull out of these seals, all right? And also when you go to pull this out, you see that O-ring, that's going to be kind of welded to the metal inside there. So you might have to work it out a little bit. Don't pry on this thing too hard because this is like thin metal. You don't want to dent this. But just kind of work it up and down and left and right a little bit. And if you had to, you could spray a tiny bit of penetrant, just a tiny bit of some really light lubricant in there and help kind of just work it around and break that O-ring free without disturbing that rod in there. You want to be careful about that. All right, as you can see, I wrapped my wire up because I did not disconnect the battery in the trunk because I want to use the scan tool to bleed it, and I want to do all that before I put everything back. And I want to check everything for leaks and all that real good before I put this back on here. But actually, I may have to... Yeah, I think that just runs down to the starter and the alternator, so I should be okay. But if anything, what I'll do is hook up a jumper cable across just to be safe. We'll figure it out, all right? But I like to do it this way just because I want to bleed it properly. Get all the air through the system, through this, get new fluid through the ABS unit, make sure everything in there lasts long with new fluid too. It's not a new vehicle, it's a pretty old vehicle. So if you can get all the fluid out, you're better off doing that. In the instructions that I found in Mitchell, it talks about pulling this out of here. I wouldn't do that. It wasn't necessary for me. I was able to get underneath and get this lower screw out with just a 1/4 inch ratchet and a deep socket 13. That worked just fine. And then for the top as well, I mean, this tool worked perfectly to get in there and get that loose. But make sure you crack your lines loose first before you go, taking all the securing bolts off and then trying to loosen your lines. Now you're working against yourself. All right. So that's pretty much how I got it out. Another thing you'll notice is that the hood is standing straight up. We just tied it up to the rafters with a piece of rope, okay, through the grill there. Just don't pull on it too tight. You don't want to crack those old grills, okay. And I took off the hood lift strut on this side, just to make sure that I had plenty of room here. Just that little bit of angle that you don't have. You can see how quick that's going to interfere with your workspace when you're trying to work on this thing. And also, we're up on jack stands, which you should be to bleed it. So I'm standing on a toolbox that's really not meant to be standing on. Anyway, just be careful when you're doing this. Be clean about what you're doing. Follow the torque specs. Make sure when you put your master cylinder back in, you get it nice and straight and you get it engaged in that rod. You don't want to knock that rod around. So those are the 2 points where you want to be very careful when you're removing it and when you're installing it, okay? Then you want to get it bolted up so the master cylinder is held firm and torqued down, and then put the lines in and thread them in very carefully. You don't want to cross thread it, okay? Then you can use what's known as a crow's fit, which I'll show you now. I actually have some line wrench style crow's feet, and you'll be able to see what I mean, the difference between that and a normal crow's foot for torquing these lines if you wanted to do that. All right, but at minimum, I would snug them up real good using a crow's foot. Using a line wrench. Okay, at minimum, that's what I would do. And so here's a line wrench, and then obviously, you'll know that a crow's foot it looks like this, but it's a lot shorter, and then it's got a hole in it to put a ratchet. I'll show that to you right now. It's a pretty cool tool to have. All right, and that was pretty much it. Obviously, you could see I also zip tied this wiring up out of my way. I just didn't want anything interrupting my flow when I was taking it out, installing it. I wanted to make it as easy as I possibly could, so that way I don't knock that rod out of place that's inside there, okay? Lubricate your new O-ring when you're going back in. And also, one other good tip is for pulling the reservoir off. These two tangs right here is where the reservoir attaches, and you can see they kind of dip down a little bit, so you have to kind of push down on the reservoir just a little bit. Remember, it's plastic and it's old, so you don't want to beat on it too much, especially if you got to reuse it. Push down a little bit, and then I used a 90-degree pick. I'll show that to you right now, as well as the crow's foot. And I was able to pull one side out, pull it up a little bit, and then pull the other side out and pull it up a little bit. But man, I had to fight to get it out of these grommets. They're old and they're pretty stiff. So I put a small pick in there, pulled back on it, and I sprayed a little bit of penetrating lithium grease, which is not the best idea, obviously, because you don't want to get it contaminating the brake fluid. But we're not pumping the master cylinder or anything, and we're not pushing it into the system. So just a little bit, just to help me save that reservoir, because we don't have a new one right now. That's why I say I'd recommend you guys get a new one, because I'll show you some stretch marks on the bottom of the other one. Obviously, you want to make sure you didn't crack it or anything like that pulling it off, so you don't install something that's cracked and then have a leak. Be thinking it's your master cylinder leaking again. And while we're on that topic, make sure you clean the front of that brake booster of any spillage before you go putting the new one back in, because then you might check it later and fool yourself because you didn't clean up your mess. That happens more than you will believe. All right, so going back over here, master cylinder, there's the O-ring I was talking about lubricating. You want to make sure the surfaces are clean. Okay, we'll also show you guys about bench bleeding that one right now coming up. But you can see like where it's got like extra, white to it there. That's like some little stress marks that I don't really like, but nothing goes through. It's not cracked or anything like that, so we're okay. But you can see why I would suggest having a new one on hand. All right. Pulling that screen out of there is a little bit difficult, but I did that to use that suction device I showed you in the beginning of the video to suck the fluid out of it, to not have such a mess when I pull that out. If you don't have that, just stuff a bunch of rags underneath the master cylinder, underneath the old one. So when you pull it off and the fluid starts leaking out, you can let it just drain out onto those rags, and you don't pick it up over the body of the vehicle. If you get brake fluid on paint, it eats it pretty fast. So you want to rinse it down with cold water. Problem is, if you rinse it down with cold water and you happen to get some on the line, or on those open lines, you don't want to have water contamination in these systems. Trust me, I know someone that ran low on brake fluid due to having a leaking brake caliper that they did not want to replace. And guess what? The stupid guy put water inside his brake system. As soon as he got on the highway, his brakes started applying, slowing the car down to a stop till the brakes were smoking, because the water was boiling in the line and increasing the pressure as if he was stepping on the brakes and the gas at the same time. Anyway, I'll make sure I send him a link to this video so he can feel stupid once again about doing that. But anyway, he's a good friend. He knows I'm just teasing. 3 screwdrivers, like I said, pop that one out. Keep things kind of clean. We're going to spray this stuff off before it goes back in. Lubricate that O-ring. Bench bleed the master cylinder. Now, bench bleeding the master cylinder, you got to open up these line ends, okay? Keep stuff clean. Open this side. Pour a little brake fluid in, and stroke the rod a couple times to try to get the fluid to go into the master cylinder, all right? You want to have some fluid in there before you install it, and you'll have an easier time with getting it filled up with fluid and bled. In this case, this master cylinder sits on an upward angle like this, and this fitting happens to be in a real nice place to really help out with bleeding it on the car, because you can leave this fitting a little bit loose or tighten and loosen just like you would with the brake bleeders to expel the air from the front of this master cylinder. It's in a perfect spot to be able to do that. So we'll also do that just to make the bleeding the system easier. You're pushing less air through the lines out into the system and into the ABS unit. So you're going to have a much better chance of having a successful bleeding operation. All right. So that's bench bleeding it. All right. Just working it with some fluid. All right. And I'm going to try my best to do it like this without reinstalling the reservoir, so I could reinstall the reservoir last once I have this all bolted up and the lines connected, so it's not in my way. All right. Before I forget, let me show you what the line wrench style crow's foot looks like. There they are. Let's see if I could get this thing open with one hand. Probably not. It's always difficult to open these. Let's see. There we go. I actually got it. So this is what it looks like. So you can easily just, for instance, I believe that's a 13 millimeter for those lines that connect to the master cylinder, both here and there. But you can see that you'll be able to put an extension on this, and you'll be able to torque this. Now, if you're using a torque wrench with a crow's foot, it does change your torque value because you're adding leverage, all right? Unless you use it at a 90-degree angle to your torque wrench. So let's say my middle finger there, that's my torque wrench. I want to use it at a 90-degree angle to the torque wrench, so that way I don't have to run that calculation to change, the torque spec to match, okay? But if you have to use it straight, you are adding length, so it's going to be a little bit less torque necessary, all right? And there is a calculation online that you can find to do that. If you have a digital torque wrench, which we're lucky we happen to have because we're not very good at math, so we got a set, a 1/2 inch and a 3/8. Those actually they can make that calculation for you. It asks you for the head length. So from the center of the fastener to the center of the 3/8 ratchet hole in it, that would be the additional head length. All right, so I think that's about it. That covers everything, right? The torque specs, once again, 26 Newton meters for the master cylinder to the booster, and about 40 Newton meters for the lines. Double check your specifications, make sure, because there's a few different hydraulic fittings that they're describing, and they're not very accurate on the description. So double check that one, but that one I'm sure about. All right, and the brake bleeders, it depends on the size. So you can go good and tight, if you got the feel, but if not, I would look it up on mitchelldiy.com or any other source that you use for your torque specifications. There's the bleeder. There's the fluid that we got. All right, you want to use .4 in this vehicle. Other vehicles too, it's good to know that it will be listed somewhere up here. Okay, this one is listed right here. Some of them is listed on the cap. Okay, just so you know, always be clean about this stuff when it comes to brake fluid. Make sure you're using brake fluid out of a clean sealed container, because brake fluid is what you call hygroscopic, and it absorbs moisture out of the air. All right, and any brake fluid that's moist, that's a problem. Okay. One other thing, I don't know if I shared this with you guys, but you see how we've got this line run and we ran it into this baby bottle. We kind of stuck a magnet piece of a motor that's magnetic to the brake rotor to hold it, just so we don't make a mess, really. And it can just collect the fluid, and we can watch what's going on with the fluid, if there's any bubbles or anything like that in it like this. It's just a cheap way of doing it instead of spending a whole bunch of money just to achieve the same result here. All right, but this is the hose that came with that suction device I was telling you about, where we would hook it up and be able to suck the fluid out of it. You always get bubbles when you do it that way, because you're actually pulling air through into the thread and then right back out of the caliper. I have seen people do things like use Teflon tape to seal them up and just screw them almost all the way in, and then just take care of bleeding that one and then move on to another one, right? I've seen that too, but I'd rather just pressure bleed it, and I don't have to worry about any of that, and I can just get fluid out of all of them. Run the scan tool, get the air out of the ABS unit, and then we should be good to go. Pump up the pedal and have the customer having real nice, tight BMW brakes again. Anyway, thanks for watching. I was trying to keep this under 20 minutes. Leave a like, subscribe, comment, do what you do, have fun.